Week 5 of college football has arrived, guys. Welcome to the College Football Countdown Show. I'm joined by Ricky Geiger and Nick Tobin. We're going to be breaking down some of the best bets of the weekend. First of all, guys, thanks for joining me. How you doing today? Ricky, start with you.
I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Excited to bet on some college football. And I got Nick down there. There's almost an accident that happened outside his apartment. Or an accident did happen. We heard the
It did, yeah. I mean, they look all right, but there's still some phone calls and stuff. Happy I'm not out there.
You're going to be able to dial in for the show and pay attention?
I'll be ready, yeah, for sure.
All right, there you go. Love it. All right, so we're going to be talking about some of the top games of the weekend. Now, I got my UConn jersey on, plus 15.5. Right off the top, we're 14.5 against Vanderbilt. Can the Huskies cover that? Just want to get your opinion on that real quick. One state, one line. Yes. Okay, next guess. Ricky, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the quarterback is better now. So, yeah.
All right, there you go. All right, Huskies plus 14.5. That's my lock of the week. All right, we're going to start with before we get into this, guys, DraftKings Sportsbook. Bet all these games on DraftKings. You get a $1,000 deposit match. Links in the description below through the Sports 2.0 network and DraftKings Best Book. Also, if you're looking to bet on the NFL this weekend, Tom Brady is returning home to New England. Very excited about that. DraftKings has its own section called Brady Bets right now because there's that much attention around it. They're giving that much focus to it. No other sportsbook is doing that, guys. So make sure you check out DraftKings. Link in the description below. We'll be shouting them out throughout the show. And then all these lines that we're showing are courtesy of DraftKings. Iowa versus Maryland to start here, guys. Now, this one's a very interesting game because Maryland's explosive. And I wouldn't say Iowa is super explosive, but they just beat teams into the ground. And that's why they've climbed up the rankings so far this year. So we start with Nick here. What do you think about this game?
This game scares me. I mean, the right side feels like it's Maryland. It feels like Iowa has had some turnover luck early in the year, and they're probably not the fifth best team in the country. So I would say the right side's Maryland with a little bit of hesitation because they're a public dog, and as I'm sure you know, public dogs usually die.
Yeah.
But I would lean Maryland, but it's a tough play for me.
Ricky, what are you rolling with here?
Yeah, I would also lean Maryland. I think I might want to live bet this more than bet it right now because Maryland has struggled a lot against teams that are willing to just like drop 7 or 8 guys in coverage on every play. That's what even Illinois did. They just can't really deal with it. They don't have the offensive line to deal with it. They don't want to run the ball. Iowa plays a lot of like pretty aggressive defense. That's how they get all these interceptions, and I just wonder if they're willing to do that. If I see Iowa like basically conceding that Maryland can run the ball and do some little stuff and stopping all these explosive plays, then I would be scared of Maryland. But Maryland's defense has been fine. And I mean, it's actually been good. I don't think it's that great, but Iowa's offense is horrible. So if they can just complete, one long pass to Raheem Jarrett and another one, I mean, I don't think it's going to take a lot. Even though it's 3, I don't think it's going to take that many big plays that Maryland wants to create to cover. So I would go with Maryland, but yeah, it doesn't feel great.
Yeah, it obviously doesn't feel great. I think it doesn't feel great, though. A big reason for that is because Iowa has a number 5 next to their name and Maryland doesn't. Now we look at this game. It's in Maryland. That should help. Tagovailoa quietly been one of the best quarterbacks in the country this year. I mean, what's he got to do to lead this team to victory? He's got to be explosive. He's got to get up on them, I think, early.
Can't turn the ball over. Against Iowa, the big thing is you can't turn the ball over.
Yeah, it's just a scary spot. I mean, was it last year where Maryland had like a big, I think it was Friday night game against Penn State, and they were like, oh, Maryland looks kind of good, and then Penn State beat them by like 60?
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll see.
If that happened, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked.
We're going to find out if Maryland's legit or not this week. And then we'll honestly find out what Iowa's made of, too, a little bit before they really get into their hardcore Big Ten schedule. Arkansas versus Georgia here, number 8 Arkansas versus number 2 Georgia. Do you think this line's disrespectful right off the top? 18.5 points to a top 10 team?
I think it's disrespectful, but I also think it's justified. Because as Arkansas is built solely on running the football, and there's no a team you want to run the ball on less right now in college football than Georgia with the big guys in the middle of their defense. I think it's a disrespectful line, but I also can't see Arkansas keeping this very close.
Yeah, Georgia's only giving up 66 yards on the ground per game, so Arkansas is going to have to pivot their strategy a little bit. Ricky, when you see this, do you like Georgia at minus 18.5 or Arkansas at plus 18.5?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously not the same game, but I think it's kind of like this Maryland-Iowa game in the sense that I really don't think that Georgia's going to complete many big plays at all. They're not really a big play team in the first place, and Arkansas plays a lot of this drop 7, 8 guys into coverage stuff and wants you to march down the field, and Georgia's going to be happy to march down the field. So I think that it should be a lower scoring game than maybe even the line, the over-under would indicate. And I also think that Arkansas got Trayvon Burks, back rolling last week. And I think there's a world where, 2 big plays to him like he did last week against Texas A&M might mean, this game's a lot closer than the line suggests. And I don't think that's, out of the realm of possibilities.
Yeah, and I think we got to give some credit to Arkansas running the football. Like, we can talk about Georgia's defense and their front 7 all day, but we also got to say Arkansas has been successful running the ball. They can do it on Saturday. I think it's going to be a challenge for Georgia a little bit.
Yeah, I just don't trust Georgia's offense. They've been great against Vanderbilt. Cool. We just talked about taking UConn against Vanderbilt. Georgia in the past 5 years has never really showed up when they play a big game. They've never showed up offensively. They haven't shown me anything that's like, oh, they're doing all this creative stuff now, so that's why they're scoring 60 points against Vanderbilt. No, Vanderbilt just stinks. So when they played Clemson, who we saw NC State move the ball against Clemson, they could have scored a lot more than they did.
They didn't score an offensive touchdown against Clemson.
Who? Yeah, Georgia, right. And Clemson's a good defense, but are they – Ohio State put up 400 total yards against them last year with the exact same players in the first half. They're not like this elite – they're not an unstoppable defense, and we'll talk about that later. So I just don't think that Georgia – how many points does Georgia have to score for you to feel comfortable with this line?
Honestly, it might be 24. I think that the Georgia issues come up more when they play a team that has the athletes to match up with them. And I just feel like Arkansas, if they can't run the ball early, it's just going to be it's going to be kind of like the reverse of that Arkansas-Texas game where it was like Texas was hanging on in the red zone early, but then at the end of the day, it's just that defense was on the field for so long that they got worn out. I just see that kind of game, and I don't know. I really don't. I can't see Arkansas moving the ball against Georgia. I can't.
Yeah, I think the way I see them moving the ball is Arkansas's offensive line. Sam Pittman's offensive line coach was for Georgia, right? I think that their offensive line will be able to hold up a little bit. And Georgia's another team that's gonna trust their dudes on the outside on defense. They're gonna load up against the run. They're gonna play, cat coverage. Hey, this is my man. I'm gonna stay with him. And now Arkansas is not good enough to play, straight up with Georgia and beat them just man to man. But Trayvon Burks is. So like I said, if they can just get him loose a couple times, I think that's kind of where I lean is hey. We just need 2 big completions. And Georgia's defense, wow, very good. They're going to give you that one-on-one coverage, on a go route at some point in time. And he's good enough to get open, even though Arkansas as a team probably isn't good enough to match up. So that's probably where I stand on that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the bottom line is to get those one-on-one matchups, though. It's going to start by running the football early in the game and having some success, get some first downs, moving the ball a little bit. Michigan, Wisconsin here. Michigan, 14th ranked team in the land. They do have to travel to Camp Randall Stadium this weekend, which is not an easy place to play. This is a tough one in my opinion to pick. What do you guys think?
Just as a rule of principle in a college football, college basketball guy, anytime you see a minus next to a unranked team against a ranked team, you bet the unranked team 10 times out of 10. And I think this is the same here. Wisconsin, as everyone knows, the final score last week was very misleading. They actually they outgained Notre Dame last week. I think Wisconsin I think they'll control this game. Michigan in the second half last week, offensively especially, was really ugly against Rutgers. And when listening to Joel Klatt on Wednesday, he was on Colin Cowherd's show. He said that the Notre Dame coaching staff looked at the Wisconsin front seven and said, we can't run on them. So I think when you have a defense like that at home and with the rule of principle that they're an unranked team favored against a ranked team, I think Wisconsin's the play here.
Yeah, 100%. You look at they've only given up 25 rushing yards per game. They got 2 games, and they got a game against Penn State to start the year, and then they also played Notre Dame. Like you said, though, Notre Dame wasn't going to try to run the ball.
That game against Penn State, they fumbled 2 or 3 times in the red zone. Like they could have easily won that game too. I love Wisconsin here.
All right, Ricky, you rolling with Wisconsin in this game?
Yeah, I mean, I love the under. Like who in this game has a gain of more than like 30 yards? Like I don't. I mean, Michigan has to watch out for tight end Jake Ferguson. I mean, who on Michigan? I mean, all Michigan's done all year is explosive runs. Besides the first week where Ronnie Bell was healthy, and without him, they can't pass. They couldn't pass on Rutgers, and Rutgers plays kind of like Wisconsin. Like they're gonna play. They're going to stack the box. They're going to kind of dare you to beat them deep, and we'll talk about that later too. And Michigan couldn't beat Rutgers deep. When we saw Penn State against Wisconsin, there were a lot of holes deep, and Notre Dame couldn't really exploit it. They don't really have great receivers and not a great arm at QB and not a great offensive line to protect them, and Michigan doesn't either. So, I mean, if you're trying to beat Wisconsin, I think you need to complete a play over the top. And, like, is Michigan going to do that? I don't see it. So I love the under. I don't really even care how low it is. I think it's like low 40s, like 42 maybe. But where do people score? I mean, pick sixes. Like, I mean, we saw that Notre Dame Wisconsin game go over last week when it had no business going over, and that's pretty much how. But yeah, I love Wisconsin here and the under.
All right, yeah. I mean, unders at 42 scare me always, no matter what it is. But again, you look at these two teams, that makes sense. Nick, so you're going with Wisconsin. Ricky, you're going with the under in this game?
That's correct.
It is. Yeah, you guys got a good rule of thumb today from the college football, college basketball betting guru over here. Unranked opponent going against a ranked opponent. If the unranked's favored, you go with the unranked. All right. Cincinnati, -1.5 versus Notre Dame. I have no respect for Notre Dame at all. I don't think they're that good of a football program. But again, Cincinnati, mid-major team, top 10 though. What do you guys think of this one? Ricky, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, to touch on the Notre Dame program stuff, I think that they are doing things in like recruiting and stuff to elevate their program. They have like a couple young players that are actually probably more talented than they've had, especially at offensive skill. But they're not ready. And like Kyron Williams and Michael Mayer are their 2 best players. And they're not creating enough explosive plays with those guys. And they're not creating any with anybody else. Cincinnati's offensive line has also been underwhelming. It's a game that scares me. I like Cincinnati as a program. I think they do a lot of things right. I think that they have more talent than people really understand. And I think they're also upgrading as a program. I don't think either team is really at their peak at this point in time, but I would lean towards Cincinnati here just because, yeah, I don't have any faith that Notre Dame's going to be able to do anything, really.
Yeah, I don't either. Well, I don't have any faith whatsoever. You look at this game, I don't know what the value is on the money line versus the spread. Probably pretty even because -1.5. But Nick, what do you think here?
I also like Cincinnati. Notre Dame, I wouldn't say they got outplayed last week, but they could have easily lost the game. They won by 28 points. And I feel like that's a good time to fade them the next week because that final score is very misleading. I'm a little scared because it just like feel-wise, I just don't – because I don't feel like Cincinnati is going to be a playoff team. And it feels like if they win this game, they're going to be in great position to be a playoff team. So it just like – I would lean Cincinnati here, but just my gut is telling me Cincinnati is going to slip up at some point, and this would be the logical spot. But then on the flip side, it also feels like Notre Dame's on a playoff team, and then if they win this game, you look at their schedule, they kind of got through their gauntlet already. So this would be a stay away for me, but I just think Cincinnati's a better team, and if you have a play, I would take Cincinnati.
All right. I mean, I can't imagine either of these teams being in the playoffs just because of mid-major teams. And Cincinnati, I shouldn't say mid-major, but based on the conference, mid-major, right? So I don't know. What do you guys think? What do you guys think? Who's going to be 4 playoff teams? Let's talk about that for a minute.
Oh goodness.
You
have to think Bama and Georgia, right?
Georgia, yeah.
I would lean towards. I don't know.
I'd say Oregon. Just the Pac-12 is so bad.
Oregon's bad.
I'd say Oregon's a playoff team, and then I could still see Oklahoma getting hot. I think that would be my 4 right now.
I just don't think the committee would ever respect a Cincinnati in the American Conference.
They would need like the SEC to get their team in. They would need Oklahoma to lose twice.
Yeah.
Oregon to lose and Ohio State to lose. And at that point,
I think undefeated Cincinnati over 1-loss Oklahoma, though. I think so.
Yeah, but I think there's a world right now where Cincinnati's looking at Oklahoma's undefeated. Does the committee put one? Okay, let's say Oregon's undefeated. Does the committee put 1-loss Ohio State Big Ten championship that just beat, in theory, like Penn State, Michigan, and Iowa in a month? Who only lost was to Oregon. Do they put Cincinnati in over them as an undefeated team that played? I think that kind of stuff would be hard for Cincinnati to deal with, and we might see another team claiming a championship.
I don't think they would get in over 1-loss Ohio State, but I also don't think that Ohio State's going to be a 1-loss team. I just think they have deeper issues right now that I feel like they're going to slip up again.
All right, so it's too early to tell. Obviously, that's the bottom line of that.
For sure.
We got a lot of good stuff coming in the coming weeks. All right, number 12 Ole Miss versus number 1 Alabama. Alabama minus 14.5. I think Alabama is unstoppable. We look at the Florida game. Okay, yeah, it was close, but Alabama still found a way to win that game. Good teams find a way to win games, and that's what Alabama is. That's what Nick Saban's created there. Can Ole Miss walk into Bryant-Denny Stadium this weekend and play with Alabama?
Yeah,
I think they can.
A sharper. Yeah, I think it's a side that I do think they can. And like I said earlier, I think that this game is going to be, very, very interesting. There are rumors last year that Ole Miss seemingly had Alabama's defensive calls, which if you watch the game would make sense. It would line up. And, I think a lot of people see that score and Ole Miss ran all over Alabama. Now, can they do that again? I don't know. Can they do it, with this no huddle stuff where Alabama's defensive line is pretty light? Someone like Will Anderson, who's Alabama's best player, he's a light defensive. I mean, he's an outside linebacker, pretty much. He plays rush end, and he's very light. They're not as good at stopping the run as we probably would expect them to be, and we saw it against Florida. And we've seen Matt Corral run the ball a lot more, and they ran all over him last year. So can they do that again? I think they can. Now you talk about the total is wild here. But one thing that I haven't really heard people talk about is we know that Lane Kiffin is going to do crazy stuff that's probably optimal for scoring that other coaches won't do. Whether that's onside kick or go for it on 4th and 6 on its own 25, that kind of stuff leads to high scoring games. And they're going to do it unless they're leading the game. So all these people, everybody's taking the under because I get it's like a principal under at 80. But I kind of like the Ole Miss team total. I think you can get it 31. I think that they are going to move the ball because they're just going to schematically move the ball just like they did last year. Last year wasn't them using Elijah Moore to beat them because Elijah Moore is great. If you watch the game, that wasn't what was happening. They were just out playing them with scheme. And I think that Alabama's always had trouble with these running quarterback, no huddle, that kind of, this gimmicky almost stuff. And Ole Miss seems to have this kind of stuff down. So my favorite play would be Ole Miss over 31.5, just because I think no matter what happens, they're going to be playing as fast as possible, and they're going to be trying to score points at any rate. I mean, we can get into Alabama. I like to hear what you guys have to say about Alabama.
I think from a betting perspective, I would wait till see if this goes to 14 or 13.5, and I would bet Alabama, because I just think in a similar sense to the Georgia game, but from the opposite perspective, I just don't think – I think if one of these defenses is going to make a play and you would assume Alabama's defense, you would take them over Ole Miss's defense to make one play. And I just think that they're not going to be able to keep up for 60 minutes with Alabama.
Yeah, my concern with Alabama's offense, and I had concerns going into the season, and everybody wrote it off after they beat Miami, who is horrible. Alabama's offense for years now, with like the receiver class they had and Najee Harris and the offensive line, they were at this point where they were getting 7.5, 8 yards per play, and it was just automatic. No matter what happened, the offense was going to move the ball, and everything was going to be easy. And no matter what was going on, they were going to complete a pass. And they don't have as much raw talent, really, at any position this year. I mean, I guess Bryce Young might be more raw talent than Mac Jones, but even then,
I wouldn't ding Alabama's talent. I mean, they had the highest rated recruiting class in history last year.
Right, but that's fresh. Those are freshmen. I mean, we're seeing Ohio State, like all those guys, the Ohio State recruiting class, which is probably like the third best of all time in the 2021 class. I mean, they're all contributing. These Alabama freshmen are not really contributing. I mean, people trying to talk about, I think JoJo Earl is a true freshman, and they're trying to get him on the field. But they're not as talented as they have been. And you see it in the stats. When they played Mercer, and I get it, Mercer sucks. They don't care, all this kind of stuff. They punted on their first 3 drives against Mercer. Go back and look at Alabama's games last 5 years. They're not doing that in many games of that caliber, and even against bad SEC teams. And the reason is because it's so easy. They don't even have to try. They just have to show up, and Najee Harris getting 9 yards per carry. They're not there this year, and I think that they're at 7 yards per play right now in 2 of their games against Southern Miss and Mercer, and then Miami, who's horrible, and Michigan State, walked all over them, and whoever else they played in the week, I don't even know. But like that 7 yards per play is bad at this point in time for an Alabama offense, and Ole Miss's defense is better. I don't know if they're going to actually be able to do anything about it, but I do have long-term concerns about the Alabama offense because it's just not as good as it has been, even though it hasn't really. You don't notice it if you're watching the games, I would say.
I would say the early season struggles, though. I mean, it's a new offense. I wouldn't expect them to come out of the gates flying, and I just feel like this is a game where they get their feet under them, and they've been in a similar way to what you're saying about Lane Kiffin. It's Bill O'Brien, right? Is the offensive coordinator?
Yeah.
Alabama. He hasn't had to pull anything out yet, and I just feel like I don't know. I think this is the game where they get rolling. I do think Ole Miss can play with them and potentially win the game. I would bet Bama -14 if I had to.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, like I said, I would rather bet on Ole Miss scoring points. I don't want to fade the Alabama offense to any degree, but I would probably. I might sprinkle a money line here because I think some crazy stuff can happen in this game. I think there's a world where Alabama's offense is actually worse, and we can talk. There are signs that they're worse. They went out and got a transfer from Ohio State, Jameson Williams, who's their best receiver right now. People love John Mechie, but Williams has been really good, and he was 5th at Ohio State this year in the spring. And he's really fast, and that doesn't show up right now. But I think if they play a team that can challenge him at the line of scrimmage, and he struggles against press coverage because he's pretty small, I think that there are just bigger concerns about Alabama that everybody wants to write off because we've seen for 10 years, this is a machine. So We'll see.
We'll see.
Weirdly, something that you said, I do. The 2 plays I would like most in this game are weirdly Alabama to cover and Ole Miss on the money line because I feel like there's value on Ole Miss here, but I do think Alabama probably rolls.
Yeah. You wouldn't be surprised. All it takes is, like I said, Ole Miss to go for on 4th and 3 on their own 32 twice and get stopped, and they're just dead. They're dead. So I think that's definitely live, where this game is 60-something to 35 because Ole Miss gave Alabama 3 25-yard fields, and that's just going to result in a ton of points and a very big deficit.
All right, so we'll move on here. Oklahoma 11.5 against Kansas State. Nick, you were talking about this game. You wanted specifically to put this game on because Oklahoma is going to roll this week. I think the same thing is going to happen. But why do you like Oklahoma so much?
Kansas State has Will Howard playing quarterback. It's been worse than ugly. And there's I think they have even more trouble this week. They might be trying to bring Skylar Thompson back, which would be. I just think with Red River next week and knowing Texas and Oklahoma, both those teams, they get going for that game. And if you look historically, a lot of times it's seen as a look ahead spot, but in this instance where Oklahoma really hasn't played anywhere close to their A game yet, I just think this is the week where they get going against one of the worst quarterbacks in the Power Five. And historically, they've struggled sometimes in Manhattan, but I just think they roll this week.
So Oklahoma beat Tulane by 5. They survived against Tulane. They beat a 1AA school 76-0. They survived against Nebraska by 7 points, and they survived against West Virginia by 3 points. So yeah,
the other
they
thing
need to start.
The other thing I'll say is that their biggest issue this year is their offensive line not being able to run the ball. But it helps that Kansas State is undersized. I think, which this is next week, I think Oklahoma's going to really struggle with Texas because they can kind of push around Oklahoma's smaller offensive line. But I just think this week they're going to be completely overmatch the Kansas State defensive line.
Yeah. Ricky, you like Oklahoma at 11.5 here?
Yeah, it's probably a game that I would rather see the first 8 minutes. Because Oklahoma, for years, we kind of talked about it with Clemson. Like, Oklahoma's offense is the opposite of Clemson. They're giving you free yards. If you're the quarterback or you're the running back or you're a wide receiver, that offense is designed like this is easy. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't spectacular plays that have made them, score 60 points instead of 40. But this year, it just hasn't really looked the same, and I don't know exactly why. I mean, Spencer Rattler's doing some dumb stuff, but my other concern is that Oklahoma's defense is a lot better. But if you guys watched that, do you guys watch that Tulane game?
I did not watch that one. No.
Tulane had a pretty scrappy quarterback, you would say. A guy that's gonna go get you 8 yards, roll out and try to run somebody over and just complete these easy passes. And they were doing a lot of tricky stuff. They were doing a lot of motion across, and they were doing a lot of running back wheel routes and motioning guys in and out and getting mismatches. And Oklahoma, we saw it last year with Ohio State late in the year, when they played Alabama or they played teams where they're doing all this man coverage stuff or, pattern matching, and they got into a lot of trouble with mismatches. Tulane did it to Oklahoma, and we haven't seen other teams really try to do it to them. When I've watched all the games, I haven't really seen a lot of these weird things. Will Kansas State pull them out? I don't know. I think you'll see early because if Skylar Thompson plays, he can run, and that does concern me because they actually looked lost against Tulane in the second half when they were doing all these, like I said, just misdirection, weird kind of plays. And, it's one of those things where if you don't lose the game, a lot of times these elite teams don't really address it. It was yeah, it happened. We'll figure it out. And I think that at some point somebody's going to catch Oklahoma with that kind of stuff, unless they did address it behind the scenes and we just haven't seen them handle it yet.
Next week, I think Texas Sarkisian's going to light them up. But
yeah,
this week, we'll see.
Going with Oklahoma this week. All right, so we got Ohio State versus Rutgers. Ohio State 14-point favorites. This game's in New Jersey. I look at this game. I kind of like Rutgers. I think Rutgers has some value here. Ohio State has not been tested that much. We talk about Oregon. They did lose to Oregon, but again, Oregon's in the Pac-12. I don't think Oregon's the best team in the world by any means. I think Rutgers is going to give them a little bit of a fight. What do you think, Ricky? We'll start with you.
Yeah, the reason I want to talk about this game is I think the Ohio State team total over is a phenomenal play for a couple of reasons. If you guys look at SP plus offense, Ohio State's SP plus offense this year is 47. The next best team is UCLA, Alabama, Ole Miss, and somebody else, Florida, at 41. Now, if you look at historical SP plus numbers, Alabama last year is at 48 or 49. LSU of 2019, Alabama of 2019, Oklahoma of 2019, 48, 49. Elite offenses live in that 48, 49, that upper 40s range in SP plus offense. And they look at, 7.8 yards per play. Ohio State's yards per play this year is 8.6. And they haven't, they played Akron, they played Tulsa. They weren't even good against Tulsa. They had better yards per play against Minnesota and Oregon, I think, or at least Minnesota. I think that this offense has struggled in red zone execution. They've had like costly drops in games. I mean, but they put up 600 yards against Oregon. And I don't think that's a long-term issue. Like, oh, they can't score in the red zone. That's just not really a predictive thing, especially with a team this talented. And they're the only team in college football right now that actually projects like they could have a historically great offense. And the players support it. Olave and Wilson are great. Their offensive line is, I think PFF came out today and had them as like 92.3 grade. They have them as the third best offensive line in the country. And then you see Trayvon Henderson, who's averaging like 10 yards a carry. And Ryan Day in a press conference this week said that, they're looking for, something like 20 touches a game for him. So they haven't done that when the quarterback's healthier and, the whole team's clicking. And I think the combination of that against a team like Rutgers, who Ohio State had 35 points on last year at halftime, I don't think that Rutgers is going to do anything to actually stop the offense. Could weird stuff happen? Yeah. But I think you're going to walk away and look at the box score and know you took over, I think, like 36.5 points and be like, I'm very glad I took over 36.5 points. So that's really my play here. Obviously, Ohio State's defense has sucked. They're using a lot more younger players, and they completely changed the scheme last week. Is that good? Is that bad? I mean, it can't be worse. So, but I don't really want to bet the 14. If I had to, I would definitely lay it with Ohio State, but I would prefer the Ohio State offense.
Nick, do you think Rutgers can come in and cover plus 14?
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's just scary going against the Ohio State offense, but I've got like deeper cultural questions about Ohio State. Like they had the kid quit middle of the game last week. I don't know. Their culture doesn't seem right this year. And that happens pretty often in college football with everyone except Alabama pretty much, where you just don't have the right mix of guys. And I just think that could be an issue with Ohio State this year. But yeah, sure, why not? Rutgers can keep it close.
Yeah, to touch on that 1 second, I was listening to somebody talk about this, like a beat reporter talked about it yesterday, and they said that if they had to pick a guy to quit the team, if they had to make a list of 5 guys to quit the team, that the guy that quit the team would have been 1 through 5 on that list, and then he's tried to quit the team like 10 times, and that's just kind of how he is. And, like I said, they're playing all these freshmen. Like, I mean, 5 of their like 10 best players are true freshmen from their stacked recruiting class. And I think when you go to Ohio State, everybody waits their turn, and then they don't play. And there is some problems there, but my understanding is that that there isn't any cultural problems, and that guy was like kind of always going to be a cultural problem regardless. So I'm not that concerned about that, but it's definitely something to watch for.
All right, cool. Love that. I mean, yeah. I mean, when freshmen jump above upperclassmen right away, especially at big time programs, right, that it can create some cancer in a program for sure. All right, we got Indiana versus number 4 Penn State. I mean, I love Penn State at home in this game. Nick, you wanted to talk about this game, correct?
Yeah, I like Penn State here. I love Penn State's defense. They've been one of the best in the country so far. And I don't like to add emotional reasons to my picks, but given how the game last year went, where Penn State kind of dominated that game, you could say they got screwed. I heard that was actually the right call. Like, even if the ball is out of bounds, if you're controlling it, apparently it's not out of bounds. So it was the right call. But you could say they got screwed last year. I just, at home, prime time, Indiana was lightning in a bottle last year. I don't know. I really don't like Indiana at all this year. And I just see Penn State rolling.
All right. What do you think, Ricky? Same thing?
Yeah, we talked about it before the show. I think in that game last year, Penn State had like 550 yards total offense at Indiana, and Indiana had something like low 200s. And those yards came on the final 75-yard drive in the last 2 minutes, in like a 2-minute drill, and then 25 yards in overtime to score. I mean, Indiana was horrible in that game. I think it was the first game of the season, and obviously it kind of sparked some stuff on both programs, but I think their win expectancy in that game last year was 99.9% for Penn State. And I think Michael Penix sucks and can just gift Penn State 3 touchdowns at any point in time. I mean, he makes some horrible decisions. And I think that the over-aggressive nature of Indiana's defense to blitz up the up the A gap with 5 guys sometimes we'll come back to hurt him in explosive plays. And yeah, I would definitely take Penn State, and I'd probably prefer the Penn State team total over if I had to bet something like that in this game.
Yeah, I love Penn State in that game. It's tough. Happy Valley is a tough place to play, especially ranked against unranked. BC Clemson. Now this game, I love BC. I think hammer BC at plus 14.5. DJ Ucla, I can't even say his last name. I'm not going to even try to say it. But you know what? He needs to be better. That whole Clemson offense has just been not good this year at all. Different Clemson team. We're not dealing with the Trevor Lawrence era anymore. So I'm going to roll with BC at plus 14.5. I'm going to hammer that. Ricky, what do you think?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it comes back to bite me, but I'm just going to bet against Clemson until they show me anything. And that is a place where I actually do think some cultural problems can seep in. The coaches are letting them down. It's kind of a hive mind culture. Like they've had like the same coaches for 8 years. They don't let certain people. I mean, their recruiting structure is weird. They do everything different there, and they've kind of gotten away with it because they've been so good as a program. But if you see them struggle a little bit, I think there can be issues. Will Shipley's out. I mean, he's probably their best offensive player besides maybe Justin Ross this year. Brian Brissy tore his ACL. He's their best defensive player. I don't know if Skalski's going to play. I think I saw he might play, but he was out the second half last game. I just don't have faith in Clemson as a whole, like as a roster right now, as a coaching. Their coaching sucks. And then Boston College, I'm the biggest Jeff Hafley fan in the world. I mean, I could talk about him for like 8 hours, but that guy's done nothing wrong. You know, he ran that Ohio State defense in 2019 that was really good. Went to Boston College. It's COVID. They had 0 COVID cases. These guys don't even know. I mean, he got buy-in immediately. He's got, his recruiting class are like top 30 when Boston College had been top 70 for the last 5 years. They played a 1-score game with North Carolina, a 1-score game with Clemson, a 2-score game with Notre Dame last year. I mean, they have a 100% vaccination rate. Just like the culture at that program is incredible, especially for a coach that got there with COVID. So, I mean, I love betting on Boston College, and I hate betting on Clemson. So, yeah, I'm all over BC here.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the overtime win for BC last week. You look at the overtime loss for Clemson last week. I mean, just momentum's with the Eagles in this game, and Clemson I just don't think is very good this year. Now, this is an interesting game. So, Nick, your rule here would be you're hammering LSU, right?
Yeah.
With ranked versus unranked. Unranked is favored. This game's in Death Valley on a Saturday night. Probably the toughest environment in college football. I'm going to go with Coach O and the Tigers.
Also, another principal rule is Bo Nix on the road. So, Bo Nix has been awful on the road his entire career. I don't think LSU is that good. They kind of – last week, I didn't watch the game, but I heard they had pretty much they had 3 explosive offensive plays, and that was it against Mississippi State. I might lean under here too because Bo Nix on the road. I don't think Auburn's going to do anything offensively. But rule of principle, you side with the Tigers, the LSU Tigers.
Is Bo Nix definitely going to start?
I think he is. He got benched last week, right? I think he's going to start.
I mean, yeah, I like Auburn here, and the only reason why is because I honestly think they should just run the ball in every play, and I think they would win the game by 14. Now, will they? Because if they don't, they're going to give more points to LSU, more likely because Bo Nix on the road does suck, and the environment's tough, and the LSU back seven has been very leaky, but they also have very talented players. I mean, as talented as really anybody in the country. It's a really weird circumstance there. But their run defense is horrible, and we saw it against UCLA. And Tank Bigsby and Auburn's offensive line are pretty good. So if they stick to the script, just hey, let's just run the ball 50 times this game, I like Auburn, but I definitely could see where Bo Nix just completely screws Auburn out of the game.
Yeah, awesome. Love that. All right, I want to go around, give one lock of the week. Mine's going to be I like BC at plus 14.5. I don't know if it's a lock. But I love that bet. It's just something about that. Nick, what are you taking? One bet.
I would go to TCU against Texas.
Okay. What are you taking in that game?
I would take TCU.
Money line?
I would take the points. I think it's 5. I think it went down to 4 today. But, again, Red River next week, potential look-ahead spot. TCU usually beats Texas. I like TCU as well.
All right, Ricky, what do you got? One bet.
Yeah, I would say if I could take a team I would take the Ohio State team total over. And like I said, there's no way you're gonna look back at that game and be like, why did I ever bet this? You're gonna look at the box score and you're gonna think this was a great bet, and things happen. And when you're betting games, things happen. But they're going to put up 600 yards, and you're gonna feel really good about that bet when you watch the game. If I had to pick a side, I think I would probably lean towards UCLA at Arizona State if we saw the DTR is healthy before the game. We didn't talk about that game, but I think UCLA is legit good. I think Arizona State is like crumbling as a program. Their coaches are all going to get fired because they committed a bunch of violations, and I think that's just the line's, I think 3, and I don't get that if DTR is healthy. So that might be one you watch the first drive, but those would be my 2 favorite bets probably.
Awesome. And then UConn plus 14.5 or plus 15, right? So we're rolling with.
Yep.
There you go. All right, guys. That was College Football Countdown. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week for another show. Get your bets right for the weekend. Best of luck. If you're going to bet, remember, do it on DraftKings Sportsbook, guys. $1,000 deposit match. Link is in the description below. Talk to you next week for another episode of College Football Countdown.